Billy Crystal and more of the couple's close friends have come together to release a joint tribute. Along with the actor, the December 16th message was signed by more than a dozen figures from the film and TV community.
For decades, Billy Crystal kept one part of his story carefully locked away, even as laughter and friendship defined his public bond with Rob Reiner. But after death silenced one voice forever, something shifted. Grief loosened restraint. Memories resurfaced, and truths once protected by loyalty finally demanded air. Friends noticed the change. Insiders sensed unfinished business. What Crystal ultimately admitted wasn't nostalgic, flattering, or easy to hear. So, why did he wait so long? What secret shaped their legendary relationship, and how does this revelation completely rewrite what fans thought they knew? He didn't listen to my warning. Billy Crystal did not speak publicly when the news first broke. He did not rush to microphones or issue statements through representatives. But when he finally did speak, his first words were not about shock or disbelief. They were about regret. He didn't listen to my warning. That warning, Billy revealed, came 2 weeks before the tragedy during a private meeting on November 30th, 2025, inside Rob Reiner's Brentwood home. Rob had called Billy earlier that afternoon and asked him to come over. He made one thing clear on the phone: this wasn't about a movie. That alone told Billy something was wrong. When Rob opened the door, Billy immediately noticed the change. Rob looked worn down in a way Billy had never seen before in nearly 50 years of friendship. His clothes were unkempt. His voice was quieter. He didn't turn on the television or play music, habits that usually filled the house with noise. Instead, the room sat heavy with silence. Rob poured water and didn't drink it. His eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, as if he was listening for something that might happen at any moment. Then Rob spoke about Nick. He described a recent relapse, escalating tension, unpredictable behavior, and nights when Michelle felt unsafe enough to leave the bedroom. He admitted something that stopped Billy cold. He no longer felt certain he could predict his son's reactions. This wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. The kind that builds after years of vigilance, hope, and disappointment, cycling without relief. Billy listened. And then, for one of the rare times in their friendship, he pushed back. He told Rob plainly that love alone was no longer enough. That the behavior Rob described crossed into dangerous territory. That keeping Nick close inside the family home, without firmer boundaries, was putting Rob and Michelle at risk. Billy wasn't accusing. He wasn't panicking. He was warning. Rob didn't argue. He didn't dismiss it. He simply said the sentence that would later haunt Billy: "I can't see my own son as a threat." Rob believed that pushing Nick away might be the very thing that broke him completely. To Rob, protecting his son felt inseparable from loving him. Even as doubt crept into his voice, he couldn't make the final leap Billy was urging him to take. When Billy left that evening, the unease followed him home. He would later admit that it was one of the few times he walked away from Rob Reiner, fearing not for a career, not for a reputation, but for a life. So, how did this private warning trace back to a friendship that began so casually? Keep watching. A friendship forged before fame. Long before tragedy, before public grief or whispered regret. Rob Reiner and Billy Crystal crossed paths in a way that felt unremarkable at the time, almost forgettable. It happened in the mid-1970s, inside a script reading "Room for All in the Family," where careers were built on routine and timing rather than destiny. Reiner was already a familiar face, firmly established as Michael "Meathead" Stivic. Crystal, younger and still untested, had been cast as Meathead's friend. The pairing looked minor on paper. In reality, it quietly rearranged both of their lives. The ease came quickly. Once the cameras stopped rolling, confrontation evaporated. What replaced it was something neither man had to work at. Conversation that didn't strain for effect, humor that didn't demand attention, and silence that didn't beg to be filled. They weren't performing for one another. They were simply present. Crystal would later say that it never felt like a professional connection being cultivated. It felt like recognizing someone you already understood. That understanding deepened outside the studio. They talked about work and complained about it too. They played baseball, traded frustrations, and shared the private fatigue that comes with trying to survive in entertainment without losing yourself. When Crystal made the permanent move from New York to Los Angeles, Reiner became an anchor. Not a guide, not a mentor, just someone who made the city feel less disorienting. They didn't need constant contact. What mattered was certainty. As years passed, neither man tried to outrun the other's success. Reiner felt the pull away from acting and toward directing, sensing that his voice carried more weight behind the camera. Crystal refined a style built on listening rather than dominating, timing rather than volume. Their careers evolved side by side, not in competition, but in quiet parallel. By the time they made When Harry Met Sally, their friendship was already settled into something durable. The film's effortless rhythm was not accidental. Crystal didn't feel managed. He felt understood. Reiner didn't over-direct. He trusted the moment. When the first screening ended and laughter filled the theater, they held hands, not in celebration of success, but in recognition of trust proven over time. As fame grew louder, their bond grew quieter. Public appearances gave way to private calls. Drop-in visits replaced red carpets. They understood something rare in Hollywood. Real friendship doesn't require constant display. In an industry fueled by visibility, they protected what mattered by keeping it unseen. That privacy explains why Billy Crystal occupied such a singular place in Rob Reiner's life. Around him, Reiner didn't have to perform calm or explain fear. Billy knew when to listen and when to challenge, when to speak, and when silence carried more weight. He didn't rush to solve problems. He stayed. For decades, Crystal stood close enough to see what the public never did. The tension beneath Reiner's steadiness, the worries he carried as a father, and the slow wearing down of certainty that no professional achievement could fix. Their friendship endured not because of shared success, but because it allowed truth to exist without defense, quietly and completely, long before anyone thought it would matter. But when truth lives off stage, what happens when the spotlight returns? Stay with us. The director. The world thought it knew. To the outside world, Rob Reiner came to represent a kind of creative certainty that Hollywood rarely sustains. His name carried reassurance. Audiences trusted him to tell stories that listened before they spoke, that balanced humor with empathy, and that treated flawed people as worthy of understanding. That reputation did not arrive overnight. It was built slowly, beginning when an Emmy-winning television actor realized that the real power of storytelling wasn't standing in front of the camera, but shaping what happened behind it. That shift took form in the mid-1980s with This Is Spinal Tap, a film that didn't chase jokes but waited for them. It observed rather than explained, trusting viewers to recognize absurdity on their own. In doing so, Reiner helped create an entirely new language of satire, one rooted in restraint. From that moment on, his work followed a clear principle. Authority doesn't come from control, but from confidence in the audience. That belief carried across genres. Stand By Me treated childhood as memory, not nostalgia, letting silence speak where dialogue could not. The Princess Bride wrapped sincerity in wit, proving that fantasy could be playful without being hollow. When Harry Met Sally turned conversation itself into the story, built entirely on the courage it takes to say what matters out loud. Even when the tone darkened, the philosophy remained intact. Misery focused on psychological tension instead of spectacle. A Few Good Men placed morality under pressure, refusing neat answers. The American president blended power with vulnerability, suggesting that leadership, like love, requires listening more than dominance. These films earned trust through character, not excess. On set, that trust was lived, not advertised. Reiner was known for creating space, inviting ideas, stepping back when needed, enabling rather than imposing. His authority came from knowing when not to speak. To actors and writers, his presence felt like a promise. You would be treated fairly, heard fully, and guided with care. From a distance, his life appeared to mirror his work. Disciplined, thoughtful, ordered. A man who could turn complexity into clarity. But there was one place where those rules did not apply. At home, there was no script, no clean edit, no final line to restore balance. Those closest to him described the atmosphere as warm, yet tense, loving, yet vigilant. A space where peace never felt permanent, where one missed call or subtle shift could change everything. And while Reiner's films asked audiences to believe in dialogue and decency, real life quietly tested how far those beliefs could stretch. But what happens when the man who controls every frame loses control at home? Stay with us. The battle he couldn't cut away from. There was one conflict Rob Reiner could never refine through pacing or soften with dialogue. It did not arrive suddenly, nor did it follow a clear beginning or end. It returned again and again, quietly reshaping daily life inside his own home. At the center of it stood his son, Nick Reiner, whose life became defined by cycles of recovery, collapse, and fragile restarts that demanded more strength each time. This struggle was never hidden. Friends and family knew the rhythm well. Treatment would bring short stretches of calm. Hope would reappear, careful and restrained. Then something would shift, often without warning, and the cycle would begin again. Addiction did not announce itself loudly. It arrived through mood changes, volatility, and moments when ordinary days suddenly felt unstable. What made it most exhausting was repetition. Over time, even hope learned to lower its voice. Nick has described addiction not as a choice, but as an invasion. A quiet voice that appeared without drama, persuasive enough to blur consequence. It didn't need crisis or catastrophe. Sometimes it surfaced on an ordinary afternoon. His response was measured, almost clinical. He fought it with memory and numbers, reminding himself that every time he listened, the result was identical. 0. It had never worked out. Not once. Yet the struggle went deeper than substances. It shaped how Nick saw himself. Outsiders reduced his pain to privilege, pointing to wealth and fame as proof that suffering made no sense. What hurt most was the assumption that people already understood. Nick carried overlapping shadows, a celebrated father and a legendary grandfather. He wasn't seen as someone trying to survive, but as an extension of a family others felt entitled to judge. What mattered most was how Rob Reiner saw his son. He never treated addiction as failure or weakness. To him, it was illness, relentless, invasive, and resistant to simple solutions. That belief shaped his parenting. He did not threaten. He did not withdraw love. He did not speak in ultimatums. He stayed, even when staying meant living under constant strain. Over the years, Nick entered treatment repeatedly, each return igniting careful optimism. Each relapse forced the family to reset emotionally. The cycle was not dramatic. It was grinding. It blurred the line between helping and enabling. Every choice felt dangerous. Push too hard and risk losing him. Hold too close and risk prolonging the fall. For Rob, love slowly transformed. It stopped being a feeling tied to hope and became a discipline tied to endurance. Love meant routines, boundaries, vigilance. It meant staying calm when fear surged. It meant protecting the rest of the family from being swallowed by one crisis. Shared dinners, holidays, and structure were preserved not to deny reality, but to survive it. At some point, Rob understood that loving his son meant learning how to live with risk. The questions never had clean answers, and the cruelty was that consequences only revealed themselves later. In 2015, the struggle found a fragile pause through Being Charlie. On the surface, it was a film. Rob directing, Nick co-writing a story shaped by addiction and relapse. Beneath that, it was an attempt to communicate differently. Nick later admitted they loved each other, but had never fully shared a language. On set, Rob listened more than he spoke, shaping scenes the way he shaped relationships. The film did not cure anything. It offered something smaller and more honest. Closeness without illusion. A brief alignment inside a battle that never truly stopped. So when fragile peace replaces hope, what happens when it finally breaks? Keep watching. The night everything slipped. The final weekend did not announce itself as extraordinary. On the evening of December 13th, 2025, Rob Reiner and his wife attended a private holiday gathering at the home of Conan O'Brien. It was the kind of Los Angeles evening defined by familiarity, friends drifting between conversations, laughter moving easily through rooms. Nothing that suggested a breaking point was near. Nick Reiner arrived with his parents. To most guests, his presence felt slightly off but not alarming. In hindsight, small details would matter. His agitation, his difficulty settling into conversations, the tension that followed him through the room. At some point during the evening, an argument occurred between father and son. It was not public, not explosive enough to draw intervention, and therefore passed without consequence, at least in the moment. Rob and his wife left the gathering early. Nick stayed longer and left later on his own. To a family accustomed to years of emotional friction, nothing about that sequence felt unprecedented. They had lived with strain for so long that silence no longer registered as danger. It was simply another pause. That pause stretched through the night, and then through the next day. From Saturday night into Sunday afternoon, the Brentwood house remained quiet. No calls returned. No messages answered. For a family conditioned by years of tension and withdrawal, the stillness did not immediately trigger alarm. Silence had become part of the emotional landscape. It wasn't until the following day that concern hardened into fear. Romy Reiner went to the house after repeated attempts to reach her parents failed. When she entered, the quiet finally took shape. She found her father unresponsive. Shock overtook instinct. She fled the house and called the police, not yet knowing that her mother had also died inside. In the chaotic chain of decisions that followed, Romy did not call a publicist. She did not reach out to lawyers or the media. Her first call was to Billy Crystal. It was not a calculated choice. It was reflex. For nearly 50 years, Billy had been the person her father turned to without explanation or performance. In that moment of collapse, Romy reached for the same constant. Billy arrived not as a celebrity reacting to tragedy, but as family, stepping into a scene no friendship is ever meant to face, carrying the weight of a silence that could no longer be undone. What Billy noticed that others missed. In the days after the tragedy, Billy Crystal did not begin with conclusions. He didn't ask who or why. His attention moved instead to small irregularities, details that felt unsettled, not accusatory, but impossible to ignore. They lingered because they did not fit the rhythm he knew. The first was the silence. The Brentwood home of Rob Reiner had always operated on routine. Calls returned, schedules honored, people coming and going. Yet on December 14, 2025, that rhythm vanished. Hours passed, then nearly a full day before concern hardened into alarm. For Billy, that gap echoed a private warning Rob had shared weeks earlier. Moments when the house grew so quiet, it felt unnatural, as if tension had emptied the rooms. Silence, once familiar, had become a signal. Then there was the separation inside the home. Rob and his wife were not found together. That detail stayed with Billy because it matched something Rob had once described: how volatile moments didn't explode in one place, but shifted room to room, unfolding in stages. The way the scene was described mirrored that pattern too closely to dismiss. Equally unsettling was what appeared unchanged. There were no signs of widespread disturbance, no chaos suggesting an intruder. To Billy, who knew the house well, the familiarity felt wrong. It suggested something intimate and contained, an event rooted in daily life rather than a sudden outside force. But the detail that tied everything together was absence. Nick Reiner was not there when the bodies were discovered. Later that evening, Billy learned Nick had been detained more than 20 kilometers away, near the University of Southern California. That distance reopened the memory of his warning weeks earlier, when Rob admitted he could no longer predict his son's reactions once tension escalated. As the case moved forward, 2 counts of first-degree murder, no bail, a court appearance set for early 2026, Billy watched from the margins, shaken. Seeing Nick in custody felt like witnessing the collapse of the faith Rob had carried for years. Investigators spoke quietly of unresolved family dynamics and unanswered questions in the final 24 hours. Billy never claimed certainty, but placed side by side the silence, the separation, the stillness, and the absence. These details formed a pattern he could not unsee, pulling him back to the warnings he feared had arrived too late. But if absence tells its own story, what does it point to? Stay with us. Legacy on trial. In the weeks that followed, grief gave way to procedure. The story that had once lived quietly inside a family was now processed by the legal system, stripped of nuance and forced into charges and statutes. Nick Reiner was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree accused of the deaths of his parents. He was denied bail, placed in county custody, and held under strict supervision as prosecutors prepared their case. Almost immediately, another layer of consequence emerged, one that deepened the tragedy rather than clarifying it. Nick's legal defense began drawing funds from the estate of Rob Reiner himself. To the public, the optics were jarring. To those who knew Rob, it felt grimly consistent. Even in death, the resources he built were being used not to protect his image, but to protect his son's right to a full defense. Hovering over everything was California's Slayer statute. a law that prevents anyone convicted of kissing their parents from inheriting from them. Until a verdict is reached, the estate remains suspended, trapped in the same limbo as the family's grief. Legacy, once defined by films and cultural memory, is now inseparable from court filings and future judgments. The irony is difficult to escape. Rob Reiner spent his life believing in patience over punishment, dialogue over force, and redemption over erasure. His films argued that people are more than their worst moments. Now, his own name is anchored to a case that offers no such clarity, only consequences. What remains unresolved is not just the legal outcome, but the meaning. Rob Reiner's legacy is no longer confined to the stories he told on screen. It now includes the one story he tried for years to keep private. A story where love fought illness, hope battled reality, and redemption, so central to his work, remains painfully uncertain. So, what do you think? Were the warnings ever enough? Or had this tragedy already slipped beyond anyone's control? Billy Crystal's grief leaves no easy answers. Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.